I never thought I would end up in court over firewood. But then again, I never expected my HOA president to literally steal from my property either. My name is Ethan Torrance, and I have lived in Pinewood Grove, a gated community just outside Boulder, Colorado, for about 3 years now. The neighborhood is nice enough, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes that all look vaguely similar in that suburban way. When I moved in, the HOA seemed reasonable. The monthly fees were not outrageous, the rules made sense, and the board members kept to themselves. That all changed about 18 months ago, when Patricia Harrington took over as HOA president. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone says the word Karen. Mid-40s, blonde highlights that were always perfectly done, designer athleisure where that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and an attitude that suggested the entire world existed to inconvenience her personally. She drove a white Escalade with custom plates that read "Boss Lady," and had opinions about everything happening in the neighborhood, whether it concerned her or not. The first real clash I had with Patricia happened last winter. I had always been a practical guy, someone who liked being prepared and self-sufficient. Growing up in rural Montana, my dad taught me the value of having supplies on hand, especially during the harsh winter months. Even though Boulder was not quite as brutal as Montana, I still liked keeping a good supply of firewood for my fireplace. There is something comforting about a real wood fire on a cold night, and besides, if the power went out, I wanted to make sure I could keep warm. So last September, I ordered a full cord of seasoned oak from a local supplier. The wood arrived on a flatbed truck, and the delivery guys stacked it neatly along the side of my house, right next to my detached garage. The pile was about 8 feet long, 4 feet high, and perfectly organized. I covered it with a heavy-duty tarp to keep it dry and ready for the winter months ahead. The whole setup looked neat and practical, exactly the kind of thing any reasonable person would appreciate. About a week after the delivery, I came home from work to find a bright yellow notice stuck to my front door. It was from the HOA, naturally, informing me that my firewood pile was in violation of community standards and needed to be removed within 14 days, or I would face fines. I read the notice 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws and spent that evening going through every single page, searching for any mention of firewood, outdoor storage, or anything that could possibly apply to my situation. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing in the bylaws about firewood storage. There were rules about not leaving trash cans visible from the street, regulations about fence heights, and restrictions on certain paint colors, but not a single word about firewood. The next day, I wrote a polite email to Patricia, explaining that I had reviewed the bylaws and could not find any rule that my firewood pile violated. I included photos showing how neat and well-maintained the pile was, and I pointed out that it was not visible from the street and did not obstruct any pathways or create any safety hazards. Her response came within an hour. She claimed that the firewood fell under a general clause about unsightly outdoor storage, and that, as HOA president, she had the authority to determine what constituted unsightly. I responded that the clause she referenced specifically mentioned things like old cars, broken appliances, and construction materials, none of which applied to neatly stacked firewood. She did not reply to that email. 2 weeks later, I received another notice, this time informing me that I was being fined $50 for non-compliance. I immediately filed a formal dispute, which according to the bylaws, required the HOA board to hold a hearing within 30 days. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at the community center, and I showed up with printed copies of the relevant bylaw sections, photos of my firewood pile, and examples of similar setups in other houses in the neighborhood. The board consisted of Patricia and 4 other members, all of whom seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. I made my case calmly and professionally, pointing out that the bylaws did not support the violation notice, and that several other homes in the community had similar or larger wood piles without any issues. One board member, a retired engineer named Robert Chen, actually agreed with me and said the violation seemed like overreach. Another member, Susan Martinez, also expressed doubts about whether the fine was appropriate. Patricia's face turned red as she realized she was losing support. She launched into a 10-minute speech about maintaining property values and setting standards, and how she had received numerous complaints about my woodpile, though she refused to say who had complained or provide any documentation. The board voted 3-2 to overturn the fine, with Robert and Susan voting in my favor along with a third member who seemed to just want the meeting to end. Patricia was furious but had to accept the decision. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Over the following months, Patricia seemed to develop a personal vendetta against me. She sent me violation notices for my trash cans being visible from the street on non-collection days, even though I had brought them in within the required time frame. She complained about my grass being too long, even though I mowed every week and it was well within the acceptable height range. She even tried to fine me for having a small vegetable garden in my backyard, claiming it violated landscaping standards, until I pointed out that the bylaws specifically allowed backyard gardens. Each time, I was able to successfully dispute her claims, but it was exhausting. Every other week, there was some new complaint, some new violation notice, some new attempt to harass me into submission. I started documenting everything, taking photos with timestamps, keeping copies of all correspondence, and noting every interaction I had with Patricia or anyone else from the HOA. The situation escalated dramatically this past fall. In late September, I ordered another full cord of wood, anticipating the coming winter. This time, I was even more careful about how I stacked it. I made sure every piece was perfectly aligned. I used brand new tarps that looked neat and professional, and I even built a simple but attractive frame to help keep the stack stable and organized. The whole setup looked like something out of a home improvement magazine. Sure enough, Patricia sent another violation notice. This time, I did not even bother arguing. I forwarded the notice to my lawyer, a good friend from college named Marcus Chen who specialized in property law. Marcus sent a formal cease and desist letter to Patricia and the HOA board, pointing out the pattern of harassment and threatening legal action if it continued. That seemed to quiet things down for a few weeks. Then winter arrived in full force. Colorado winters can be unpredictable, and this year we got hit with a major cold snap in early December. Temperatures dropped below zero for nearly a week straight, and the whole region was dealing with rolling power outages as the grid struggled to keep up with heating demands. My fireplace became essential for keeping my house warm, and I was burning through my firewood supply faster than I had anticipated. During this cold snap, something strange started happening. Every few days, I would notice that my woodpile seemed smaller. At first, I thought I was just using more wood than I realized, but then I started paying closer attention. I would count the rows, take mental notes of the pile's size, and check it regularly. There was no doubt about it. Someone was taking my firewood. The first time I was certain, I lost about a quarter of a row, maybe 15 or 20 pieces. I checked with my neighbors on both sides, thinking maybe they had grabbed some in an emergency and planned to replace it, but both said they had not touched my wood pile. Over the next week, more wood disappeared. Not massive amounts, but consistent thefts, probably every 2 or 3 days. I decided to set up a security camera. I already had a doorbell camera at my front entrance, but I needed something that could watch the side of my house where the woodpile was located. I went to an electronics store and bought a wireless security camera with night vision and motion detection. It took me about an hour to get it installed and configured, but once it was working, I had a perfect view of my entire woodpile and the surrounding area. 2 days later, the camera caught her. It was about 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was at work when I got a notification on my phone that the camera had detected motion. I pulled up the live feed and could not believe what I was seeing. Patricia Harrington was walking up my driveway, bold as brass, heading straight for my woodpile. She was wearing her usual expensive workout gear and had a large canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. I watched as she pulled back the tarp, selected several pieces of wood, and loaded them into her bag. She made 2 trips, taking about 20 pieces total, before covering the woodpile back up and walking away. The whole thing was captured in crystal clear high-definition video, complete with timestamps and her face clearly visible. I was stunned. I had suspected it might be her, but actually seeing it was something else entirely. This was not some misunderstanding or gray area in the HOA bylaws. This was straight-up theft. I immediately saved the video file to 3 different locations, including cloud storage, and sent a copy to Marcus. His response was immediate and furious. He told me to file a police report right away and to make sure I preserved all the video evidence. He also said that this was potentially criminal trespass in addition to theft, since she had come onto my property without permission for the purpose of committing a crime. I left work early and drove straight to the Boulder Police Department. The officer at the front desk directed me to the Property Crimes Division, where I met with Detective Sarah Rodriguez. I explained the situation, showed her the video evidence, and provided a written statement detailing all the times I had noticed wood missing. Detective Rodriguez watched the video 3 times, taking notes, and then asked me several questions about my relationship with Patricia and the HOA. I told her everything. The harassment over the past 18 months, the bogus violation notices, the cease and desist letter, all of it. She listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions, and then told me that she would need to investigate further before any charges could be filed. She said I should expect a follow-up within a few days and that, in the meantime, I should not confront Patricia directly about the theft. That was on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had not heard anything from Detective Rodriguez, but I did receive an email from Patricia. She was calling an emergency HOA meeting for Monday evening to discuss serious violations of community standards by a resident. She did not name me specifically in the email, but it was pretty obvious who she was talking about. I forwarded the email to Marcus, who told me to attend the meeting but to say as little as possible. He said he would come with me, and if Patricia tried anything, he would shut it down immediately. I also sent a courtesy email to Detective Rodriguez, letting her know about the meeting and suggesting that Patricia might be trying to retaliate against me for reporting her theft. Monday evening arrived cold and clear. Marcus and I drove to the community center together, arriving about 10 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. The parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, word had gotten around that there was going to be drama and people were interested. Inside, the main room was set up with chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia was in the center seat, looking smug and confident. The other board members, including Robert and Susan, looked uncomfortable. About 30 residents were scattered throughout the room, more than I had ever seen at an HOA meeting. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her agenda. She claimed that I had been repeatedly violating community standards, harassing board members, and creating a hostile environment in the neighborhood. She had prepared a whole presentation with printed photos of my house, my woodpile, and various other aspects of my property, all while making dramatic claims about how I was destroying property values and undermining the HOA's authority. It was absurd. Every single violation she mentioned was something that had already been disputed and overturned, or things that were not actually violations at all. She showed a photo of my trash cans and claimed they were constantly visible from the street, even though the photo was clearly taken on collection day. She showed a photo of my backyard garden and called it an eyesore, even though it was neat and well-maintained and explicitly allowed by the bylaws. Marcus let her go on for about 10 minutes before standing up. He introduced himself as my legal counsel and calmly pointed out that every single item Patricia had mentioned had already been addressed through proper dispute channels, and that her continued harassment constituted a potential violation of Colorado's laws against abuse of HOA authority. He suggested that the board should be very careful about how they proceeded, especially given the pending legal matters. Patricia's face went pale. "What legal matters?" she demanded. Marcus looked at me and I nodded. He explained that Patricia had been caught on video surveillance stealing my property and that a police report had been filed. He said that rather than focusing on fabricated violations, the board should be concerned about having a president who was under criminal investigation. The room erupted. People started talking all at once, some demanding to see the video, others asking questions about what was happening. Patricia tried to deny everything, claiming it was a misunderstanding and that I was making false accusations to deflect from my own violations. Robert Chen asked me directly if I had proof of the theft. I pulled out my laptop, loaded up the video file, and asked if I could use the projector. Robert quickly set it up, and within minutes, the entire room was watching Patricia walk up my driveway, pull back the tarp on my woodpile, and load wood into her bag. The video was damning. There was no way to misinterpret what was happening. The silence after the video ended was deafening. Patricia looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Several residents were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Susan Martinez was shaking her head slowly, looking disappointed. Robert Chen spoke first. "Patricia, I think you need to resign, effective immediately." Patricia tried to argue, but the other board members quickly agreed. Within 15 minutes, they had taken a formal vote, and Patricia was removed as HOA president by unanimous decision of the remaining board members. She stormed out of the meeting, yelling about lawsuits and defamation, but nobody seemed particularly concerned about her threats. After Patricia left, Robert apologized to me on behalf of the board and asked if there was anything they could do to make amends. I told them I just wanted to be left alone to live my life without constant harassment. Several other residents came up to me after the meeting and thanked me for standing up to Patricia. Apparently, I was not the only one she had been targeting with bogus violations and petty complaints. 2 days later, Detective Rodriguez called me. She said she had completed her investigation and was moving forward with criminal charges against Patricia. She would be charged with misdemeanor theft and criminal trespassing. The detective explained that, because the value of the stolen wood was relatively low, probably around $150 based on the amount taken over multiple thefts. It would not rise to the level of a felony, but it was still a serious matter. Detective Rodriguez also mentioned that during her investigation, she had discovered Patricia had done similar things to at least 2 other residents in the neighborhood. One person had noticed gardening supplies going missing from their shed, and another had reported that decorative stones from their landscaping had been taken. In both cases, security footage or witness statements implicated Patricia. The detective said those victims were also considering pressing charges. I asked when Patricia would be formally charged, and Detective Rodriguez said the paperwork was being processed, and that Patricia would likely be arrested within the next few days. She said I would be notified when it happened, and that I should expect to be contacted by the district attorney's office about potentially testifying if the case went to trial. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. I was not there to see it, but several neighbors were, and word spread quickly through the community. Apparently, 2 uniformed officers showed up at Patricia's house around 9 in the morning, spoke with her briefly, and then placed her in handcuffs and took her to the police station for booking. Her husband, a quiet accountant named David who mostly seemed to stay out of Patricia's HOA drama, looked mortified. The local news picked up the story. It was not major headlines or anything, but the Boulder Daily Camera ran a piece about an HOA president being arrested for stealing from residents. They did not use Patricia's name since charges had just been filed, but everyone in the neighborhood knew who it was about. The article quoted Detective Rodriguez saying that the case was a reminder that HOA board members are not above the law, and that residents should not hesitate to report criminal behavior, regardless of who is committing it. Over the next few weeks, I got periodic updates from the district attorney's office. Patricia had pleaded not guilty at her arraignment and was released on her own recognizance. Her lawyer was apparently trying to negotiate some kind of plea deal, but the DA was not particularly interested in being lenient. The theft and trespassing charges might be misdemeanors, but the pattern of behavior and the abuse of her position as HOA president made it more serious in the prosecutor's eyes. Marcus told me that Patricia's legal troubles were probably just beginning. In addition to the criminal charges, the HOA itself was considering a civil lawsuit against her for misuse of her authority and for creating potential liability for the association. Several residents, including me, were also discussing a class action lawsuit for harassment and abuse of power. Marcus said cases like that were difficult to win, but given the documentation I had and the criminal charges, we had a better chance than most. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for mid-February. I took the morning off work and drove to the Boulder County Justice Center, a modern building near downtown where the county courts were located. Marcus came with me, even though I was not required to have a lawyer present since I was just a witness and victim, not a defendant. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with seats for maybe 40 people. Patricia was there with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in a gray suit who had a reputation for defending white-collar criminals. Patricia looked different from the confident, aggressive person I was used to seeing. She seemed smaller somehow, deflated. She was wearing a conservative dress and minimal jewelry, clearly trying to look sympathetic. The hearing itself was relatively quick. The prosecutor, an assistant DA named Jennifer Walsh, presented the basic facts of the case and the evidence, including the video surveillance footage. Patricia's lawyer argued that the charges should be dismissed because there was supposedly some confusion about property boundaries, and Patricia had believed she had permission to take the wood. It was a weak argument, and the judge did not seem convinced. Judge Michael Brennan reviewed the evidence, asked a few questions, and then ruled that there was sufficient probable cause for the charges to proceed to trial. He set a trial date for late April and asked both sides if they wanted to discuss a potential plea agreement. Patricia's lawyer said they would consider it, and the prosecutor said she was open to discussions. As we left the courtroom, I noticed Patricia staring at me. There was no anger in her expression, just a kind of defeated resignation. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the 18 months of harassment, the bogus violation notices, the constant stress of dealing with her petty tyranny, and the feeling passed. March came and went without much happening on the legal front. Marcus kept me updated on the behind-the-scenes negotiations. Apparently, Patricia's lawyer was trying to get the charges reduced to a simple civil infraction with a fine and no criminal record, but the DA was insisting on at least some kind of criminal conviction, given the pattern of behavior and abuse of authority. The back and forth dragged on for weeks. Meanwhile, life in Pinewood Grove was noticeably better. The new HOA president was Robert Chen, the retired engineer who had supported me during my first dispute with Patricia. Robert ran the HOA the way it was supposed to be run, focusing on actual community maintenance and reasonable enforcement of legitimate rules. Violation notices dropped dramatically, and the few that were issued were for actual problems like someone leaving a broken car on their lawn for months, or a house that had not maintained their yard in over a year. Robert also initiated a review of all the violation notices and fines that Patricia had issued during her tenure. He wanted to make sure that everyone who had been unfairly targeted got refunds for any fines they had paid. It turned out that Patricia had collected over $15,000 in questionable fines over 18 months. Some of it could be refunded, but a lot of people had already paid and moved on, not realizing they could have disputed the charges. In early April, about 2 weeks before the scheduled trial date, I got a call from Jennifer Walsh, the prosecutor. She said Patricia had finally agreed to a plea deal. She would plead guilty to 1 count of misdemeanor theft and 1 count of criminal trespassing. The recommended sentence was 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, restitution to all victims, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Patricia would also have to attend a class on property rights and HOA governance as part of her probation terms. Jennifer asked me how I felt about the deal. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to see Patricia go through a full trial to have every detail of her behavior exposed in open court. But another part of me was just tired of the whole thing. I wanted it to be over. I told Jennifer that if she thought the deal was fair and appropriate, I would support it. The plea hearing was scheduled for April 23rd. I did not have to be there, but I decided to go anyway. I wanted to see it through to the end. Marcus came with me again, and we sat in the back of the courtroom as Patricia and her lawyer stood before Judge Brennan. The judge asked Patricia if she understood the terms of the plea agreement and if she was pleading guilty voluntarily. She said yes in a quiet voice that I barely recognized. He asked if she understood that she was admitting to committing theft and trespassing. Again, she said yes. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced her according to the agreement's terms. Then Judge Brennan did something I did not expect. He looked directly at Patricia and spoke to her about the responsibilities that come with being part of an HOA board. He said that HOA leaders are entrusted with significant power over their neighbors' lives and property, and that power must be exercised with fairness, transparency, and respect for the law. He said that Patricia had violated that trust in multiple ways, and that her actions had damaged not just her victims, but the entire concept of community governance. It was a surprisingly strong statement, and I could see Patricia's shoulders shaking slightly as she fought back tears. The judge finished by saying he hoped she would use her probation period to reflect on her actions and to become a better neighbor and community member. Then he dismissed the court. As people filed out, Patricia's husband David approached me. He looked exhausted and embarrassed. He apologized for his wife's behavior and said he had tried to get her to drop the vendetta against me months ago, but she would not listen. He said they were planning to sell their house and move to a different community, somewhere they could start fresh. I told him I appreciated the apology and that I hoped things worked out for them. The restitution payment arrived about 3 weeks later. It was a check for $275, covering the estimated value of the stolen firewood, plus the time and expense I had incurred dealing with the theft and the legal process. It was not a huge amount of money, but it felt like vindication. I framed the canceled check and hung it in my garage, a reminder of the whole bizarre saga. The civil lawsuit against Patricia moved forward separately from the criminal case. About a dozen residents joined together in a class action, claiming damages for harassment, emotional distress, and improper fines. Marcus handled most of the legal work, and Patricia's homeowner's insurance ended up settling the case for $30,000 to be divided among the plaintiffs. My share was about $3,000 after legal fees, which covered all the time I had spent dealing with violation notices and disputes over the previous year and a half. More importantly, the lawsuit resulted in some significant changes to how the HOA operated. The board updated the bylaws to include better oversight of board members, clearer dispute resolution processes, and protections against harassment and abuse of authority. Robert worked with a lawyer who specialized in HOA governance to draft the new provisions, and they were approved by a vote of the membership in June. Summer came to Pinewood Grove, and life returned to normal. I tended my garden, mowed my lawn, and went about my business without constantly worrying about violation notices or HOA drama. Patricia and David sold their house in July and moved to somewhere in Arizona, according to the neighborhood gossip. I wished them well, or at least I wished David well. I hoped Patricia had learned something from the whole experience, but I honestly did not care that much either way. In September, as the weather started cooling down and the aspens in the mountains turned gold, I ordered another cord of firewood. The delivery truck arrived on a Saturday morning, and the workers stacked it in the usual spot next to my garage. I covered it with a fresh tarp, making sure it was neat and secure. That evening, Robert Chen stopped by with his wife Marie. They had seen the wood delivery and wanted to make sure I was not going to have any problems with the new setup. I assured them it was fine and invited them in for coffee. We sat on my back deck, watching the sun set over the foothills, and talked about how much better things had gotten in the neighborhood over the past few months. Robert mentioned that the HOA had actually grown in membership because word had spread about the reforms they had implemented after the Patricia situation. People appreciated having an HOA that focused on maintaining the community rather than harassing residents over trivial matters. Property values had stayed strong, and the neighborhood had a better atmosphere overall. As they were leaving, Marie turned to me and said something I had not really thought about. She said I had done the whole community a favor by standing up to Patricia and not just accepting the harassment. She said a lot of people had been intimidated by Patricia's aggressive tactics and had just paid the fines or removed perfectly reasonable things from their property to avoid conflict. By fighting back and documenting everything, I had exposed the problem and forced a change that benefited everyone. I had not really seen it that way. From my perspective, I was just trying to keep my firewood and be left alone. But Marie was right. If I had just given in and removed my woodpile or paid the bogus fines, Patricia would have continued her reign of petty tyranny indefinitely. Other residents would have continued to suffer under her arbitrary rules and personal vendettas. The whole situation would have gotten worse instead of better. That winter was one of the best I had experienced in Colorado. We got plenty of snow, the kind of beautiful, fluffy powder that makes the whole landscape look like a postcard. My fireplace worked perfectly, and my firewood supply lasted the entire season without any mysterious disappearances. I hosted a few friends for dinner parties, and we sat around the fire, drinking wine and telling stories. More than once, someone asked me to tell the saga of Patricia and the firewood theft, and it always got big laughs, even though it had not been particularly funny while it was happening. In March, I got a letter from the Colorado Department of Corrections, Probation Division. It was a form letter informing me that Patricia Harrington had successfully completed 6 months of her probation without any violations and was on track to complete the full term. The letter asked if I had any concerns or complaints about her compliance with the restitution and other terms of her sentence. I wrote back saying I had received the full restitution payment and had no complaints. Spring arrived, and with it came the annual HOA meeting where board positions were up for election. Robert was running for re-election as president, and there was no opposition. The meeting was well attended and remarkably drama-free. Robert presented a budget that made sense, outlined plans for some needed repairs to community facilities, and answered questions from residents in a straightforward, respectful manner. It was, in other words, exactly what an HOA meeting should be. During the open comment period, an older resident named Frank Morrison stood up and said he wanted to publicly thank me for what I had done the previous year. He said he had been one of the people who had noticed gardening supplies going missing from his shed, and after Patricia was arrested, the police had recovered some of his stolen items from her garage. He said he had been too embarrassed to press charges at the time, but he was grateful that I had been willing to stand up and do what was right. Several other people applauded, which made me feel uncomfortable, but also proud. I stood up and said that I had just been protecting my property and that anyone would have done the same. But even as I said it, I knew it was not entirely true. A lot of people would not have fought back. They would have moved the woodpile or paid the fines or just tried to avoid conflict. I was glad I had not done that. As summer approached, I started planning some improvements to my property. I wanted to build a proper firewood storage shed, something more substantial than just a tarp over a pile. I drew up some plans, made sure they complied with all the actual HOA rules about structures and setbacks, and submitted them to the board for approval. Robert reviewed them, confirmed everything was in order, and approved the project within a week. No drama, no bogus violation notices, no harassment. Just a normal, functional HOA doing its job. I built the shed over a couple of weekends in June with help from my neighbor Tom Anderson, a contractor who lived 3 houses down. The structure turned out great, a neat wooden shed with a sloped roof and open sides that allowed air circulation to keep the wood dry. Tom and I celebrated its completion with beers on my back deck, admiring our handiwork. "Think the new HOA president will give you grief about it," Tom joked. "Not unless it violates some actual rule," I replied, "which it does not because I checked 3 times before building it." Tom laughed. "Man, Patricia really did a number on you, didn't she? Got you paranoid about HOA compliance." He was not wrong. Even now, Months after Patricia had moved away and long after the criminal case was resolved, I still found myself double-checking rules and taking photos to document compliance. It was a habit born of necessity, and while I hoped I would eventually relax, for now it seemed like a good practice. Better safe than dealing with another violation notice, even if the current board was reasonable. As fall approached again, a full year after the woodpile theft had been discovered, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. In some ways, it seemed absurd that something as simple as firewood had led to criminal charges, court appearances, and a complete change in HOA leadership. But in other ways, it made perfect sense. The firewood was never really the issue. The issue was about power, control, and what happens when someone in a position of minor authority decides to abuse it for personal reasons. Patricia had let her role as HOA president go to her head. She had confused enforcing community standards with controlling her neighbors, and when someone dared to challenge her authority, she had escalated to the point of committing actual crimes. The firewood theft was not some desperate act born of need. Patricia was not poor or struggling to heat her home. She was comfortable, probably wealthy by most standards. She had taken my firewood as an act of spite, a way to punish me for not submitting to her arbitrary rules. In the end, she had paid a real price for that pettiness. A criminal record, even for misdemeanors, is not nothing. It affects employment, housing, and reputation. The probation, community service, and restitution were inconvenient and embarrassing. The civil lawsuit had cost her tens of thousands of dollars. And perhaps most significantly, she had been forced to move away from her home and her community, unable to face the neighbors who knew what she had done. I did not take any pleasure in her downfall, but I did not feel guilty about it either. She had made her choices, and choices have consequences. If she had just left me alone about the firewood in the first place, none of it would have happened. If she had accepted the board's decision to overturn that first violation notice, it would have ended there. If she had not decided to steal from my property, she never would have faced criminal charges. At every step, she had the opportunity to de-escalate, to be reasonable, to recognize that she was in the wrong. She had chosen not to. In September, I ordered my firewood delivery for the coming winter. This time, the wood went directly into my new storage shed, stacked neatly and protected from the weather. I stood back and admired the full shed, feeling satisfied and prepared for whatever winter would bring. The security camera was still in place, still recording, but I was not really worried anymore. Patricia was gone, the HOA was functioning properly, and life was good. A few weeks later, on a crisp October morning, I got an unexpected visitor. Detective Sarah Rodriguez stopped by, the same detective who had handled Patricia's case. She was following up on something unrelated to me, but had wanted to check in and see how things were going. I offered her coffee, and we sat on my front porch, talking about the case and its aftermath. Detective Rodriguez told me that Patricia's case had become something of a training example in the department, used to illustrate how patterns of behavior and abuse of authority can escalate to criminal conduct. She said it was a reminder that police need to take HOA disputes seriously, even when they seem petty or trivial, because sometimes there are real victims and real crimes hiding behind the facade of community standards enforcement. She also mentioned that since Patricia's arrest and conviction, the department had received several other complaints about HOA-related harassment and theft in different neighborhoods around Boulder. In at least 2 cases, the investigations had revealed similar patterns of board members abusing their authority and retaliating against residents who challenged them. Criminal charges had been filed in both cases. You might have started something. Detective Rodriguez said with a slight smile. People are realizing they do not have to just accept it when HOA board members cross the line. I thought about that for a long time after she left. I had not set out to start any kind of movement or make any kind of statement. I had just wanted to keep my firewood and be left alone. But maybe that was enough. Maybe just standing up for yourself, documenting what happens, and refusing to be bullied is all it takes to create change. Winter came to Colorado with a vengeance that year. We had heavy snows in November, and temperatures stayed below freezing for weeks at a time. My fireplace got a workout, and I burned through my firewood supply steadily. Every time I went out to the shed to grab more wood, I thought about the previous year and how different things were now. No missing wood, no violation notices, no stress about what Patricia might do next. Just the simple pleasure of keeping my home warm with a good fire. On Christmas Eve, I hosted a small gathering for some friends and neighbors. The house was warm and cozy, the fireplace crackling with oak logs from my shed. Robert and Marie Chen came, along with Tom Anderson and his wife Linda, and a few other neighbors I had gotten to know better over the past year. We ate too much food, drank too much wine, and stayed up late telling stories and laughing. At one point, Robert raised his glass and proposed a toast. To good neighbors, fair rules, and firewood thieves getting what they deserve, he said with a grin. Everyone laughed and drank, and I felt a wave of gratitude for these people and this community. It had taken a bizarre and stressful ordeal to get here, but it was worth it. As the evening wound down and guests started heading home, Tom pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "I never told you this, but Patricia tried to fine me about 5 years ago for having work trucks parked in my driveway. I am a contractor. I need my trucks. But she said they were commercial vehicles and violated some rule she made up. I ended up parking them at a storage facility for 8 months and paying $100 a month just to avoid dealing with her." "Why did you give in?" I asked. Tom shrugged. "I do not know. It seemed easier at the time. But after watching you fight back and actually win, I regretted not standing up to her. If I had, maybe she would not have gotten away with as much as she did for as long as she did. Or maybe she just would have escalated with you the way she did with me," I said. "There is no way to know." "Maybe," Tom agreed, "but I am glad you did it. You made things better for everyone, even if that was not your goal." After everyone left and I was cleaning up, I thought about what Tom had said. He was right that I had not set out to change anything beyond my own situation. But the ripple effects had been significant. Patricia was gone. The HOA was better run. Other residents felt empowered to push back against unfair treatment, and even the police department was taking HOA abuse more seriously. All because I had refused to accept being harassed over a pile of firewood. The rest of that winter passed peacefully. I worked. I saw friends. I kept my house warm with firewood from my shed. I did not attend many HOA meetings because I did not need to. Everything was running smoothly, and there were no disputes or drama to deal with. It was, in other words, exactly how life in an HOA community should be. In February, I got one final piece of correspondence related to the Patricia situation. It was a certificate of completion from the Colorado Probation Department, informing me that Patricia Harrington had successfully completed all terms of her probation, including full restitution, community service hours, and the required classes. The letter noted that her case was now closed. I filed the letter away with all the other documents from the case, a thick folder that represented 18 months of conflict and stress. I thought about throwing it all away, but decided to keep it. Not because I wanted to dwell on it, but because it was a reminder of what I had learned about standing up for myself and not backing down when I was in the right. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and the usual rhythm of life in Colorado. I tended my garden, planted new vegetables, and started planning my summer projects. The HOA continued to function well under Robert's leadership. Property values in Pinewood Grove remained strong. Life was, in a word, normal. Looking back now, the whole saga seems almost surreal. The idea that an HOA president would steal firewood as revenge for a homeowner challenging her authority sounds like something from a sitcom, not real life. But it was real, and it happened, and it taught me valuable lessons about community governance, standing up to bullies, and the importance of documenting everything when you are in a dispute. I never heard from Patricia again after her final probation letter. I do not know if she learned anything from the experience or if she is causing problems in her new community in Arizona. I hope she changed, but I do not know. What I do know is that in Pinewood Grove, things are better. The HOA serves the community instead of harassing it. Residents feel heard and respected. Disputes are handled fairly and transparently, and nobody is stealing anyone's firewood. My woodshed stands as a quiet monument to the whole affair, a practical structure that serves its purpose while reminding me that sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it is something as simple as keeping your firewood supply intact. Every time I grab logs from that shed, I feel a small sense of satisfaction knowing that I stood my ground, documented the theft, and saw justice done. The security camera is still there too, still watching over my property, though I rarely check the footage anymore. It serves more as a deterrent now, a visible reminder that my property is protected and monitored. I like to think that if anyone ever considers taking something that does not belong to them, they will see that camera and think better of it. As I write this, it has been over a year since Patricia was arrested, and almost 2 years since the whole saga began with that first ridiculous violation notice about my firewood pile. The seasons have turned. Winter has given way to spring and summer and fall and winter again. Life in Pinewood Grove goes on, better than before, more peaceful than I could have hoped. I still burn firewood in my fireplace. I still keep a full cord on hand each winter. I still make sure everything complies with the HOA rules. But now it is easy because the rules are reasonable and fairly enforced. And I still remember the day I pulled up that security camera footage and saw Patricia Harrington stealing my firewood, setting in motion a chain of events that would result in criminal charges, court appearances, and ultimately, justice. Sometimes people ask me if it was worth all the stress and hassle, if I should have just removed the woodpile or moved to a different neighborhood. My answer is always the same. Yes, it was worth it. Not because of the money from the restitution or the civil lawsuit, and not because I wanted revenge on Patricia. It was worth it because standing up to bullies and insisting on fair treatment is always worth it, even when it is difficult and stressful and takes up your time and energy. The firewood was never really about firewood. It was about principle, about refusing to be pushed around by someone abusing their authority, about insisting that rules mean something and that everyone, including HOA board members, has to follow them. And in the end, that principle was vindicated. The system worked. The evidence was clear. The charges stuck. Patricia was held accountable for her actions. Today, as I look out my window at my neat firewood shed and the security camera keeping watch, I feel at peace with how everything turned out. Justice was served, not in some dramatic courtroom showdown, but through careful documentation, proper legal channels, and the steady application of laws that protect property rights and punish theft. It was not flashy or exciting, but it was real and it was right. And that is the story of how Karen tried taking my firewood supply, and how she got charged with trespassing and criminal theft. It is a story about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and evidence, and about what happens when someone in a minor position of authority forgets that their power has limits. Most of all, it is a story with a satisfying ending, one where the person who committed crimes faced real consequences, and the victim got justice. In a world where that does not always happen, I consider myself fortunate. The wood in my shed will keep me warm through many more winters to come, and every log I burn will remind me that sometimes the smallest battles, fought over the most ordinary things, can make the biggest difference in how we live our lives and how our communities function. Patricia Harrington learned that lesson the hard way, and Pinewood Grove is better for it.